Millionaire dropped his wallet on purpose. What the poor girl did next left him speechless. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories every week. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. The morning rain had turned the streets of Richmond, Virginia, into a mirror of gray puddles and distant lights. The air smelled of coffee and wet pavement. Lilia Cole stood behind her tiny takeaway cart, steam rising from the kettle as she poured another cup for a sleepy commuter. Her fingers were red from the cold, her apron damp, her smile faint but determined. Across the street, a man paused under an umbrella. He looked ordinary: dark jeans, worn jacket, the kind of stranger no one would look twice at. But beneath the disguise stood Mason Brown, the billionaire founder of Brownwood Furnishings, a company known for turning reclaimed wood into luxury art pieces. That morning, he was not a CEO. He was a man with a quiet question to answer. Does honesty still exist when no one is watching? He slipped his leather wallet from his pocket, thick with bills and a black business card, and let it fall to the wet sidewalk near her cart. The rain pattered softly. He walked away without looking back. Lilia noticed it almost immediately. Her first instinct was disbelief. She glanced around. No one else seemed to see. The wallet looked expensive, the kind that could pay her month's rent, maybe even her father's gambling debt. Her chest tightened. You could just keep it, a cruel voice whispered. No one would know. She bit her lip and shook her head. Not mine, she muttered. She grabbed a napkin to wipe off the rain and ran after the man. Sir, excuse me, you dropped this. Mason turned, pretending to be surprised. You sure it is mine? I saw it fall, she said, slightly out of breath. You must have dropped it when you reached for your phone. He looked at her for a long second, testing the truth in her eyes. Her clothes were worn, her hands rough from work, but her voice was steady. Thank you, he said finally, taking the wallet. Not many people would have bothered. She smiled faintly, shrugging. Maybe they would. Maybe you just have not met them yet. Gumtin. When she turned back toward her cart, Mason stood in the rain watching her, the corners of his mouth lifting into a small, thoughtful smile. Inside that wallet was a tiny camera, capturing every moment of what had just happened. Across the street, Lilia was already back to work, pouring coffee for the next customer, as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. To her, it was just a normal morning. To him, it was proof that somewhere between greed and grace, decency still lived, and for reasons he could not explain, Mason Brown knew that this rainy Virginia morning was the beginning of something that would change both their lives forever. The rain had stopped by the time afternoon light spilled across the narrow streets of Richmond. The small river beside the marketplace shimmered under the weak sun, but the chill still clung to the air. Lilia Cole closed the lid of her coffee cart and counted the few crumpled bills she had made that morning. It was barely enough to cover supplies for the next day, let alone rent. Her phone buzzed with a message she had been dreading. It was from the debt collector who had taken over her father's gambling balance. Payment due tomorrow. No more delays. Her throat tightened as she read it. She had already sold her only gold necklace and pawned her mother's old wristwatch. All that remained was the cart and the hope that business would pick up before the month ended. She walked home, her sneakers soaked from puddles, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion. The apartment she rented was part of an old two-story building near the train tracks. Paint peeled from the walls, and the hallway smelled faintly of mildew. When she opened the door, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, his head buried in his hands. A half-empty glass of cheap whiskey stood beside a stack of overdue bills. Dad, she said quietly, setting her bag down, you promised to stop. Though he did not look at her. It was the last game, Lilia. I thought I could win it back this time. She clenched her fists, her heart aching with anger and pity. We are drowning, and you keep digging the hole deeper. I will fix it, he muttered, voice rough. I just need another chance. Lilia turned away, swallowing the lump in her throat. There are no more chances. Not for us. She went to her small room, the one with a flickering bulb and a single window that overlooked the river. On the wall hung a small receipt from the police station, lost and found claim number 1147, the one she had received when she returned the wallet that morning. She stared at it for a long time. To her, it was not just paper. It was proof that she still had a choice, even when life gave her none. That night, She lay awake listening to the hum of passing trains. She thought about the stranger with kind eyes who had thanked her in the rain. Something about him lingered in her mind, the quiet sincerity, the way he had looked surprised by her honesty. For a brief second, she wished she could meet him again, not to ask for help, but to tell him that doing the right thing still felt good, even when it cost everything. The next morning, she was up before sunrise, lighting the small burner of her cart, the smell of ground coffee mixed with the damp scent of the city. The first customers were construction workers heading to a nearby site, tired but friendly. Lilia handed out cups with her usual warm smile, though her eyes carried the weight of another sleepless night. As the crowd thinned, a woman in her 30s approached the cart. She wore a beige coat and carried a small folder. "Are you Lilia Cole?" she asked. Lilia hesitated. "Yes. Can I help you?" The woman smiled gently and handed her a sealed envelope. "Someone asked me to deliver this to you." Twelve. Before Lilia could ask who, the woman walked away through the crowd. Lilia opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a plain white sheet and a single business card embossed in gold. Mason Brown, Brownwood Furnishings, CEO. Below it, a handwritten note in neat, deliberate script read, "Thank you for reminding me that honesty still matters. If you ever need a real opportunity, come find me." Her breath caught. Mason Brown. She had heard that name before. His company supplied custom furniture to luxury hotels across Virginia. He was on magazine covers and local business networks, often praised as one of the state's youngest self-made millionaires. And she had just handed his wallet back in the rain, thinking he was an ordinary man. For a long time, she simply stood there, the paper trembling between her fingers. She wanted to believe it was real, but her mind whispered doubt. Why would a man like him care about a girl who sold coffee from a cart? She tucked the card into her apron pocket and looked up at the morning sky. The clouds were breaking, a faint line of gold appearing on the horizon. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. When her father called later that day, asking for more money, she said nothing about the card. Instead, she told him she would handle the debt herself. "Do not worry, Dad," she said softly, even though her heart trembled. "I will figure something out." That evening, she cleaned her cart and packed up early. On her way home, she stopped by the bridge where she had returned the wallet. The rain had washed the sidewalks clean, leaving the reflection of city lights on the water. She took the business card from her pocket and ran her thumb over the raised gold letters. Somewhere in the tall buildings across the river, Mason Brown might have been sitting in his glass office, unaware that the girl who had passed his test was staring out at the same skyline. Lilia whispered to herself, "Maybe doing the right thing does not fix everything, but it keeps me whole." And with that thought, she tucked the card safely inside her wallet and walked home through the quiet Virginia night, unaware that her small act of honesty had already changed her fate. The next morning arrived with pale light stretching through the clouds over Richmond. The wind carried the faint scent of river water and roasted beans from Lilia's small cart. She set up her stand before the rush hour began, moving slower than usual, distracted by the white envelope she had received the day before. Every few minutes she would glance at the business card tucked inside the clear sleeve of her phone case. The gold letters Mason Brown, Brownwood Furnishings, gleamed under the weak morning Sunday. She still could not believe it. The man she had chased through the rain was a billionaire. A man whose interviews played on business channels, a name that appeared on the cover of Richmond Monthly. Lilia smiled to herself, shaking her head. "Of all people," she murmured, "why test me?" Her friend and occasional helper, Lucy, arrived with a tray of pastries. "You are talking to yourself again," she teased, placing the tray down. "Long night?" Lilia laughed softly, just thinking about something strange that happened. Strange good or strange bad? I am not sure yet. Before Lucy could ask more, a white delivery van pulled up across the street. Two men in uniforms carried out a stack of wooden panels stamped with the Brownwood Furnishings logo. Lilia froze. Her heart began to race. The company name stared back at her, bold and unmistakable. One of the workers waved at her cart. "Best coffee in the city," he shouted before walking inside a nearby office building. Lilia looked down at her hands. Maybe fate was trying to say something. That afternoon, when business slowed, she took out her phone and typed the company's address into the map app. It was only a 20-minute walk from her neighborhood, an elegant brick building near the riverfront. She hesitated for a long time before whispering to herself, "I will just look, nothing else." The sun was dipping low when she finally reached the building. Through the tall glass windows, she could see modern furniture displays, oak desks, handcrafted chairs, polished shelves that smelled faintly of cedar. Employees walked in neat lines, carrying folders, greeting each other with polite smiles. Lilia suddenly felt small, like she had stepped into a world that was not hers. She almost turned away when the receptionist inside looked up and smiled warmly. "Can I help you, miss?" Lilia hesitated, clutching the strap of her bag. I am looking for Mr. Mason Brown." The receptionist's eyebrows lifted slightly but remained kind. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, I just came to return a message. He dropped his wallet a few days ago and he sent me this card." She showed the gold business card. The woman studied it, then picked up the phone. "Please wait here for a moment." Lilia's heart pounded as she stood near the reception desk. Every sound in the lobby felt amplified: the hum of the elevator, the ticking of a clock, the soft shuffle of shoes on the marble floor. Then the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Mason stepped out, dressed simply in a navy sweater and gray slacks, not the formal CEO she had imagined. When his eyes met hers, he smiled in quiet recognition. "Miss Cole," he said, approaching. "I was hoping you might visit." She blinked in surprise. "You were?" He nodded. "After you returned my wallet, I wanted to thank you properly. But I thought if I offered money, it would insult you." Lilia laughed nervously. "You would have been right." Mason's expression softened. "Then I am glad I waited. May I show you something?" Before she could answer, he gestured toward a hallway lined with photographs, images of carpenters, designers, and factory workers. "This company began in my grandfather's garage. Every piece of furniture here is made by hand, by people who believe in honesty and patience. Those two words built everything you see." He paused, looking at her. "And the world could use a few more people who live by them." Lilia looked around, her eyes wide with admiration. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I had no idea furniture could carry a story." He smiled faintly. "Everything worth building does." For a moment, they stood in silence, the hum of the city muted by glass and wood. Mason finally said, "I have been planning to open a new branch, a place where people can sit, drink coffee, and learn about craftsmanship. But I need someone who understands real people, someone who knows what it means to work with heart." She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "You mean me?" "Yes, I mean you." Her pulse quickened. "Mr. Brown, I sell coffee on the street. I have no degree, no management experience. And yet," he interrupted gently, "you have something most people spend years trying to find: integrity. That is the foundation I want." Lilia's voice trembled. "Why would you trust me?" "Because you already passed the hardest test I could give." Her throat tightened as his words sank in. For the first time in years, someone was offering her more than pity, someone was offering faith. Mason handed her a small folder. "Inside are the details. Think about it. You do not have to decide today." She took the folder, her hands shaking slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled. "Thank me by saying yes when you are ready." As she stepped out into the cool Virginia evening, the city lights shimmered on the water like scattered stars. The folder, pressed against her chest, felt heavier than gold. For the first time in a long while, the future did not look impossible. It looked open, and somewhere inside the tall building behind her, Mason Brown watched from his window, a faint smile on his face. The test was over, but the story of what came next had only just begun. 2 days later, Lilia sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, staring at the folder Mason had given her. The papers inside described the new project, a community cafe built beside one of Brownwood's showrooms, meant to connect local craftsmen, customers, and workers. It was called the Open Hands Project. Her name was written on the proposal as Project Coordinator. Her father shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "What is that?" he asked, glancing at the folder. "An opportunity," she said softly. "A man I met. He wants me to help manage a new cafe project." He frowned, suspicion clouding his tired face. "Sounds too good to be true. People like that always want something in return." Lilia closed the folder gently. "Maybe he just wants to build something honest." Her father sighed, saying nothing more. She slipped the folder into her bag and left before he could ask another question. The Brownwood building looked even larger this time. The receptionist greeted her by name and directed her upstairs. When the elevator doors opened, Mason was already waiting, standing beside a wall of sketches and plans. "I was hoping you would come back," he said. "I wanted to ask more about the project," she replied. He gestured for her to sit. "We want to create a space where people can share ideas over coffee, simple, comfortable, real. The kind of place that reminds us why we do what we do." Lilia studied the sketches, Reclaimed wood tables, handmade mugs, cozy lights. It feels human, she said quietly. That is exactly the point, Mason replied. Brownwood is built on stories, not just profit. I think you can bring that heart into this. She hesitated. You could hire anyone. Why me? Mason smiled gently. Because you already understand what it means to work hard without losing kindness. You do not fake empathy, you live it. Her eyes filled with emotion, though she tried to hide it. I have never led anything before. Then you will learn, he said simply. I will pair you with a design mentor. You will handle the daily operations. Fair pay, full training, and complete creative freedom for your menu. All I ask is that you believe in what we are building. Look, Lilia took a deep breath. When do we start? His smile widened. Tomorrow morning. The next day arrived early. Lilia walked through the unfinished cafe, bright corner space overlooking the river, still echoing with the sound of drills and hammers. The scent of sawdust filled the air, mixing strangely with the coffee she carried in her thermos. Workers nodded politely as she passed. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere that was still becoming something. By noon, Mason joined her. What do you think? She turned toward the large window, watching the sunlight spill across the half-built counter. It feels like hope, she said. He nodded. That is what I was aiming for. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side. Mason often visited without warning, rolling up his sleeves to help the staff. Lilia admired how different he was from what she had imagined. He listened more than he spoke. He asked questions about the workers' families, their towns, their favorite meals. Once, while she was arranging chairs, he quietly placed a small vase with wildflowers on a table. Details matter, he said. They make people feel seen. Lilia smiled, realizing he lived by his words. But with every passing day, rumors began to spread among the employees' whispers about the new coffee girl who seemed too close to the boss. Some smirked when she entered meetings. Others fell silent when she passed by. Lilia ignored it at first, but one afternoon she overheard two supervisors talking by the hallway. Must be nice, one said, to catch the CEO's attention with a cup of coffee. Her hands trembled as she carried the paperwork back to her desk. The warmth of pride she had felt turned cold. For a moment, she wanted to run, to disappear before the whispers became a storm. That evening, Mason noticed her silence as they reviewed the progress chart. Something is bothering you, he said gently. It is nothing, she replied quickly, forcing a smile. Just tired. He studied her for a moment, clearly unconvinced, but chose not to press. As she walked home through the dim Virginia streets, Lilia felt the familiar ache of doubt settling in. She had worked her whole life to prove she was more than her circumstances, and now that she had been given a chance, people refused to see her effort, they only saw a rumor. She looked up at the dark sky, whispering to herself, I wanted to earn this, not owe it. Unaware that behind those office walls Mason Brown was planning something that would soon silence every whisper and show the world exactly who she truly was. The following week, the tension inside the Brownwood building grew heavier. Lilia felt it in the way people looked at her, in the whispers that stopped the moment she entered a room. She buried herself in work, checking invoices, arranging supplier lists, and meeting local artists who wanted to showcase their handmade cups. But no matter how hard she tried, the sting of those rumors followed her like a shadow. One afternoon she found a newspaper folded neatly on her desk. A red circle had been drawn around a small gossip column that read, Brownwood's CEO seen spending long hours with mystery woman insiders claims she is the new project girl from the street. Lo! Her heart sank. She knew instantly that someone from the office had leaked it. The photo showed her and Mason standing outside the CAF construction site, mid-laughter. It looked intimate, even though it had been nothing more than a shared joke about spilled paint. When Mason entered her office later that day, he noticed the paper immediately. I saw that, he said quietly. I did not come here for this, she said, her voice trembling. I came to work, but now everyone thinks I am here because of you. He stepped closer, keeping his tone calm. People will always talk, Lilia. What matters is what we know is true. But what they think still matters, she replied. To you, I am a story of kindness. To them, I am a scandal. Mason hesitated, realizing the truth in her words. Then let me fix it, he said. She shook her head. No, you cannot by silence. I need to stand on my own, or none of this means anything. Come and just... Before he could stop her, she picked up her bag and the project folder. Thank you for believing in me, she said softly. But I have to walk away before I lose who I am. She left the building that evening as the sky turned orange over the river. The half-finished calf stood quiet behind the construction fences, the smell of fresh wood still hanging in the air. She paused, touched the doorframe gently, and whispered, "Goodbye." That night, Mason sat alone in his office, staring at the blueprints spread across his desk. The place that had been filled with purpose now felt empty. For the first time in years, he felt something he could not define: loss, not of a project, but of a person who had reminded him why he built anything at all. The next morning, Lilia returned to her small apartment and unpacked the few items she had brought to work. Her father was gone, leaving only a note on the kitchen counter. "Do not worry about me. I went to stay with a friend. I am proud of you, Lilia. Do not give up." Tears welled in her eyes as she folded the note. She wanted to believe his words, but all she could feel was exhaustion. For days she stayed home, unsure of what to do next. The folder from Mason lay unopened on her table. Then, a letter arrived in the mail, stamped with the Brownwood logo. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single invitation printed on cream paper. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of the Open Hands Project CAF. Saturday, 6 p.m. At the bottom, in Mason's handwriting, were 6 words. "Please come. The story is not over." She stared at the message for a long time, torn between pride and curiosity. Finally, on Saturday evening, she stood at her mirror, brushed her hair, and slipped on a simple white dress. She told herself it was only to support the workers who had built the CAF, nothing more. When she arrived, the CAF looked transformed. Warm lights glowed through the windows, the scent of roasted beans filled the air, and a small crowd gathered under a banner that read, "Built by honesty, shared with heart." As she stepped inside, conversations hushed. People turned to look at her, not with gossip this time, but with surprise. Near the front, Mason stood behind a microphone, addressing the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "tonight is not about me. It is about the people who remind us that integrity is still alive. This entire project began because one person chose to do the right thing when no one was watching." He turned toward her, his gaze finding hers in the crowd. "That person is here tonight, Miss Lilia Cole." A wave of applause filled the room. Lilia froze, her heart pounding. Mason continued, "She did not just return a wallet. She returned faith to me and to this company." Lilia's eyes shimmered as the crowd parted to make way for her. Mason stepped closer, holding out a small framed paper, the original lost and found receipt she had pinned above her cart. "This," he said, "is where the real story began." Her voice broke as she whispered, "You kept it." "I kept everything that mattered," he replied softly. For the first time since she had walked away, the whispers were gone. The room was filled with something purer respect. And as Lilia looked around the CAF built on honesty and heart, she realized Mason had never been testing her anymore. He had been proving that goodness still had a place in the world. For a long moment, Lilia stood frozen under the warm lights of the CAF. The applause around her faded into a hum, and all she could see was Mason calm, sincere, and waiting. Her heart pounded as she stepped closer. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her voice refused to come. When he handed her the framed receipt, her fingers brushed his. The paper inside was slightly crinkled, a little stained from rain, but it looked beautiful behind the glass. "I did not deserve this," she whispered. Mason smiled softly. "You earned it long before you knew I was watching." The crowd clapped again, and the cameras flashed. But unlike the gossip weeks earlier, this moment felt clean. No rumor, no doubt, only truth. Lilia felt her throat tighten. "You did not have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "When I dropped that wallet, I wanted to see if kindness still existed. You showed me that it does, and now everyone here knows what I learned that day." The audience cheered, and the event host invited everyone to tour the CAF. People began moving around, admiring the woodwork, tasting the first cups of coffee. But Mason stayed beside her. "Come," he said gently. "I want to show you something." He led her toward the back of the CAF where a small plaque was mounted on the wall. The metal plate gleamed under the lights. It read, "The Open Hands Project. Inspired by the honesty of Lilia Cole." She gasped. "You named it after me?" Mason shook his head. "Not after you, because of you. Every worker here, every dollar we spend, every customer who walks in will see that honesty built this place. That is your legacy, not mine." Tears gathered in her eyes. "Mason, I do not know what to say." He looked at her gently. "Say you will stay. Run this place. Teach people what you already know, that dignity is worth more than wealth. Lilia wiped her tears and nodded slowly. I will stay. But not because I owe you anything. Because I believe in it too. Good, he said with a smile. Then we are partners. For the first time in months, laughter came easily to her. As the evening went on, she moved among the guests, explaining the story behind each corner of the cafe, the handmade mugs, the recycled counters, the photo wall that displayed the workers who helped build it. The whispers that had once haunted her were replaced by praise and curiosity. People thanked her, asked about her recipe, and called her an inspiration. Later, when the crowd began to thin, Mason found her standing near the window overlooking the river. The reflections of the city lights danced on the water. Are you happy? He asked quietly. She smiled, her voice soft. I am. For the first time, I feel like I belong somewhere. He nodded. You always did. You just needed people to see it. There was a pause, filled with the sound of music drifting from the cafe speakers. Lilia turned to him, searching his face. When you dropped that wallet, did you ever think this would happen? He laughed under his breath. No. I only hoped someone honest would pick it up. I never imagined she would change my life. Her cheeks warmed. You are exaggerating. I am not, he said, his gaze steady. You reminded me that kindness is not weakness. It is strength, and sometimes it is love in its simplest form. Lilia's heart skipped. She did not know what to say, but she did not need to. They stood together, watching the rain begin to fall outside, soft, steady, like the day they first met. Before she could turn away, Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note. I kept this too, he said. The note you wrote when you returned the wallet. She opened it and smiled. It read, Doing the right thing costs nothing, but it can change everything. That was true then, he said, and it is true now. Lilia looked up at him, her eyes shining. Then let us keep proving it. And as they stood by the window of the cafe that now carried her name in spirit, the city lights reflected over them like quiet stars marking the end of one test and the beginning of something far more lasting. She stayed by the window for a while after the guests had gone, her hands wrapped around a cup of her own coffee. Outside, the street was slick with fresh rain, the same kind of rain that had started everything. Mason joined her, rolling his sleeves up as if the celebration had been nothing special to him. You know, he said, I was worried you would not come tonight. I almost didn't, Lilia answered, but I realized hiding from people does not make the lies go away. He nodded slowly. You taught me that too. They stood there in a quiet that felt comfortable, the smell of roasted beans and new wood surrounding them. Mason leaned against the counter. There is something I want to show you. He handed her a folded check. The first week's profit. I had the team deposit most of it into a fund in your name. It will pay off the debts your father left. She stared at the paper, unable to speak. Mason, you don't have to. I am not paying for your life, he interrupted gently. I am investing in what you build next. She blinked back tears. Then I guess I have to build something worth it. He smiled. You already have. Mugging Tom. The cafe lights reflected off the wet street, and for a second, she saw the two of them as they had been that first morning. A soaked man and a tired girl, strangers connected by a small act of honesty. Now, the world around them was brighter, but the feeling was the same, real, simple, human. Later, as she locked up, she found the framed receipt still hanging near the door. Beneath it, Mason had added a brass plate with a single line, Integrity builds everything. She touched the words and whispered, Yes, it does. Mason waited for her outside, umbrella in hand. Need a ride home? She shook her head with a soft laugh. No, I will walk. The rain and I, we have a history. He grinned. Then I will walk with you. They stepped into the drizzle, sharing the umbrella, the city's lights glowing around them. Cars passed, the river murmured, and every sound felt softer than before. Do you ever regret dropping that wallet? She asked. Only that I did not meet you sooner, he replied. She looked up at him, smiling through the rain. Then I am glad you did. As they crossed the street together, Mason said quietly, The world could use more people like you, and more people willing to believe in them, she answered. They kept walking, their reflections side by side in the puddles, two lives that had once been worlds apart, now joined by the simplest test of all, doing the right thing when no one was watching. A few months passed, and spring arrived in Richmond with warm wind and blooming magnolia trees. The cafe had become a small success, filled every morning with workers, students, and locals who came not only for coffee, but for the quiet peace it offered. On the walls hung photos of community projects that Brownwood had funded, each one signed with the cafe's motto, Built by Honesty. Lilia worked tirelessly, not as an employee but as the heart of the place. Her morning started before dawn, and Mason often joined her before heading to the main office. They spoke less about business now, and more about life, about what they wanted to build beyond money and titles. One morning, Mason arrived carrying a folder. The city council approved the expansion, he said with a proud smile. 3 new cafes in neighboring towns, all under your management. Lilia froze, the news sinking in. 3? That is too much. It is exactly right, he replied. The Open Hands project is not about me anymore, Lilia. It is yours now. She looked at him, eyes glistening. You really mean that? I do, Mason said, and I have something else. He placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a framed photograph of the cafe on its opening night, with a single line written in his handwriting. To the woman who reminded me what wealth really means. She tried to speak, but could not. Her voice broke into a whisper. You should not give me so much credit. He smiled gently. You gave me a reason. That is more than enough. Later that week, Brownwood hosted its annual charity gala at the downtown hall. For the first time, the main theme was not furniture or design, but community and character. Lilia stood near the back of the room, dressed simply, watching the elegant crowd. Mason took the stage to speak. When I first started Brownwood, he began, I thought success was measured in profit and prestige. But one rainy morning, a young woman taught me that integrity is worth more than any fortune. Tonight, every dollar raised will go to the Open Hands Foundation, helping people like her, people who choose right over easy. The hall erupted in applause. Mason stepped down from the stage and found her in the crowd. You see, he said softly, now everyone knows who the real teacher was. She shook her head, smiling through her tears. No, Mason, we taught each other. To pray. After the gala, they walked along the river, the same one that had witnessed their first meeting. The water shimmered under the city lights, and the wind carried the faint scent of roasted beans from the cafe across the street. Mason stopped and turned to her. Do you ever think about that day? The wallet? The rain? All the time, she said with a quiet laugh. I thought it was just another hard morning. I had no idea it would change my life. Tumbling. He looked at her with warmth that went beyond gratitude. Maybe some tests are never meant to fail. Maybe they are meant to find the right person. She smiled, the kind of smile that came from peace, not surprise. Then I guess we both passed. They stood in silence, watching the reflections ripple across the water. Above them, the night was calm, and the lights from the Open Hands cafe glowed softly like a promise proof that one small act of honesty could ripple far beyond what either of them ever imagined. Summer settled over Richmond with soft golden evenings and the sound of laughter spilling from the open doors of the Open Hands cafe. The project that had begun with a lost wallet had grown into something far bigger than either of them expected. 3 new cafes were under construction, each carrying Lilia's design warm wood, bright windows, and a simple phrase carved near every door, do the right thing, even when no one is watching. One evening, after closing, Lilia sat by the window wiping the counter. Outside, the city lights shimmered on the river, just like that first rainy morning. She heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her and turned to see Mason standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Still working? He asked. Old habits, she said with a smile. I like ending the day the way it started, with coffee and gratitude. He handed her a cup and joined her by the window. For a while, they simply sat in silence, watching the water move below the bridge. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and summer rain. Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was the same leather wallet, the one that had started everything. Inside, instead of money or cards, was the original receipt from the lost and found office, now laminated and kept like a relic. I thought you should have this, he said softly. It belongs to you more than it ever did to me. Lilia touched it carefully, her fingers trembling. You kept it all this time? I did, Mason replied. It reminded me who I want to be. Oh. Her eyes glistened as she whispered, and who is that? The man who never forgets the woman who returned what she did not have to. Lilia looked up at him, her smile gentle. Then keep it with you, she said, closing his hand around the wallet. It is not about what you dropped, it is about what we found. For a moment, neither spoke. The cafe lights dimmed as the night deepened, wrapping them in quiet warmth. Mason set the wallet on the table between them and said, There is one last thing I have been meaning to ask. She tilted her head. What is that? He smiled, reaching for her hand. If I drop my heart this time, will you return it too? Her laugh was soft, breaking through the stillness. Only if you promise not to lose it again. He squeezed her hand gently. Deal. Outside, the rain began to fall light, steady, familiar. The same kind of rain that had once tested a stranger's honesty now witnessed their beginning. Through the window, the calf sign glowed brighter against the dark Virginia night. The Open Hands Project. It was more than a business now. It was proof that integrity could build more than trust. It could build love, community, and a lifetime of purpose. And as Mason and Lilia sat together in the quiet cafe, the sound of rain on the glass marked the perfect ending to a story that began with one simple act of doing the right thing.